Hi, Helena. Welcome to the show. Congratulations on the release of your debut novel, Last Chance Live.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited for the release and for our young adult book club members to read it and enjoy it as much as I have. As you know, your book has been selected for our October book club, which we're very excited. Your story, Last Chance Live, is like a magnifying glass being aimed at society, the entertainment industry, and the judicial system. I want to just explore more about the concept of this. So, can you walk us through what Last Chance Live is, the book, and also the show?
The book Last Chance Live is about teens on death row who compete on a reality TV show in which one contestant wins freedom and forgiveness because America votes for one winner, and the other contestants are eliminated. So the book follows the journey of Eternity Price, who is an 18-year-old from Texas. She is someone who has never been popular, never been loved, and is quite certain that she's not going to get chosen to win this competition. But as a death row inmate, this show represents her last opportunity to fight for her life. So the show and the book are doing two different things. The show is offering the American voters who exist within the universe of the book the opportunity for entertainment and to participate in the judicial system in a unique way, to make determinations about guilt and forgiveness in a concrete way through voting. But the book is doing something a little bit different. The book is about the show, but it's not. The book is really about all of us. And Eternity Price, the main character, is really in some sense a mirror who reflects all of us readers. She's a stand-in for all mankind. She grapples with the same questions that we all must contend with. Among those questions are the existential things that we face, like what have I done in my life and where am I going when I die? I describe Eternity as an everyman character because in a sense, we are all on death row like Eternity. We all have done terrible things. The impact of what we've done is different. Not everyone has killed somebody, but we've all had wrongdoing in our lives and we're all headed to a grave at some point. And so the journey of Eternity Price is really the journey of all of us.
Just to talk about the concept of reality TV, the criminal justice and reality TV show together is timely, but also chilling. And you mentioned that we're all kind of like eternity. So, should we be rooting for her?
Yeah, so I would say that's up for the reader to decide. I wrote Last Chance Live to offer a framework of how to think about issues, but not what to think. And it was important as I wrote this book to make sure that I was giving readers the space to come to their own conclusions about questions like, should I be rooting for Eternity? Is she a victim, a villain, or both? And even just the premise of the book itself offers one of those how to think versus what to think opportunities. Is a show like this a harrowing, horrific premise that takes advantage of people in a tough situation? Or is it a unique opportunity that offers a lifeline to inmates who have few to no other options left? The book is really written to give readers the space to come to their own decisions on things like that.
I like that. Because this is a young adult audience, I think it's really powerful to put that in their hands to read the text and internalize the conversation and not feel as if the answer is given to them. It's critical thinking, which I think is really powerful to be able to build in a young audience, especially given the times that we're in.
Exactly, exactly. And that's really part of what motivated that aspect of the book. You know, young readers and adult readers, we exist in an ecosystem where our media tells us what to think and our, algorithm tells us what to think and perhaps our peers tell us what to think. And it's increasingly easy to outsource that analytical process, to outsource our analysis to some external person or entity. But we don't want to do that because we need our brains. We need to be able to think for ourselves. And I do wonder what will happen over time if young people and older people continue to outsource that work and then don't develop the neural pathways and the ability to really think for themselves and exercise those muscles.
Wonderful point. And this comes up in the book, outsourcing work. So you use AI within the novel. Can you tell us more about how you use it? What's at play here and what readers should be aware about? Like, what's the warning in the use of AI?
Just to be clear, I don't use AI personally. I've never accessed ChatGPT. I don't even really know what it is. I'm going to be the last analog dinosaur on this planet to get on board with this. I don't know if it's an app, a website. So there is no AI used in the process of writing this book or any part of it. But one application of these technologies that the book explores is how algorithms are used in the criminal justice system. The book is talking about a particular aspect of the criminal justice system. The book is talking about capital punishment. But broadly, in the broader system, there are jurisdictions that use algorithms to determine sentencing ranges for defendants. They will use the algorithm to determine what sentence might be appropriate for one defendant who's from a certain zip code and has a certain number of prior incidents. And it raises a question as to what biases might be baked into that algorithm. Does an algorithm give a young person from Compton the same sentencing recommendation that it gives a young person from Happy Town, USA? Not that Compton isn't happy, but somewhere with a different demographic and socioeconomic background. So it's one of the ways that algorithms are currently used in the justice system that I wanted to explore. But the other thing that I hope to do is to provoke readers to think, in what ways are algorithms making determinations for me, right? The same way an algorithm is directing these young people's lives to an extent, even though within the criminal system, prosecutors and judges do exercise human discretion for now. There are lots of ways that algorithms are making decisions for us. It decides what content I see, on my personal devices, and it decides what information I'm exposed to and what I think. And I think the parallels between how it impacts the defendants and how it impacts us are notable and worth exploring.
Yes, thank you so much for making the distinction of use of AI. AI usage is such a hot topic, and it's important that we're clear that the development of the book was not AI, but there is a device used within the novel to determine the inmate sentences, which I think was really important. And I think that's another timely message
Thank you.
here. Because again, this is a young adult audience, and I think it's really good to start allowing them to think deeper about what they're experiencing and form their own thoughts instead of having people form those thoughts for them. We use social media in our day to day. Current generations are growing up with social media. They don't know what life is like before social media. And it is a curated existence on social media. What they're served is determined by the people who own social media, by the people who are paying to advertise on it, and then the news networks, what's being put out, what's being prioritized for their viewership. So there's like so much involved in it. A lot of us don't think, and it's not just young adults, a lot of us don't know or realize how much goes into what is served to us. So I think it was really a good thread to have this looked at from the point of view of eternity and how her experience, how she ended up in the system, how her case went was
Yeah,
impactful.
and I think there's also just a broader way that screens impacts the life of eternity. So without giving away too much of the book, and it's a bit hard to talk about in detail without all of the twists and turns being revealed, but there's a question as to whether eternity could have even ended up where she did without the screen. So much of her existence is impacted and shaped by screens. As a child, her understanding of who she is and how she's valued in her country, the messages she gets about body types like hers, overweight, darker colored skin, the messages her peers get about people like her and how that impacts their relationship with her, the show itself. There's also a question, again, without getting into too much spoilerish detail, there's a question as to whether she could have committed her crime without screens. So Eternity's Journey makes me think of something that UNC Chapel Hill's sociology professor, Dr. Tressie McMillan Cotton, once said. And I'll leave it to listeners and readers to decide for themselves if they agree or disagree. But Dr. Cotton once said, the internet probably ruined everything good and made everything bad worse. And that premise is explored in part through Eternity's Journey. And I hope to invite readers to contemplate what aspects of her life would have been different without the screen and what aspects of my life would be different without the screen too.
That's something that I feel like I need to think about because I'm in the middle of not having had social media from birth. And I can see the impact and I could see the erosion of things like our attention
Attention
span,
span. Yes.
our
Yeah.
comprehension, attention, and we only have so much time in the day, and so much of our lives are now on this little device. We've
Yeah.
gone away from even just the physical of TV or the physical of going to the movie theaters and looking at what's in our hand.
And
So
40-second spurts. Yeah. And this is why I describe those cognitive capabilities. That analytical process is like a muscle that I'm afraid that we don't use enough. I see it in myself too. I am sitting here as a mother and an author, and I have a very limited attention span. And so Last Chance Live was in some ways my contribution to try to help people with that battle for our brains that we're seeing waged by screens and algorithms and infotainment systems and media, everything trying to sort of capture our mind and keep us on their products and preventing us from being able to really think and engage with long form questions, long form text. And by long form, I just mean length. So listeners and readers could think of Last Chance Live as a hundreds page long TikTok challenge, right? Like I challenge you to see if we, myself included, still have the attention span, to read a book of that weight. But, it's such an essential skill, the ability to process how to think and not what to think. And it's what makes us human. It's what distinguishes us from all other types of creation. It's what distinguishes us from the machines that are increasingly doing more of what humans do every day, that analytical process. And so I really want to invite young readers to feel equipped to engage in that and to recognize that their voice and their analysis matters and is essential to the continuation of our country.
there was a recent study that has shown that the daily reading habits of people have been declining for a really long time. And I find that to be very scary. And I don't think there are a lot of things in place to kind of circumvent it. And there
Mm.
are so many things going up now, more barriers being put up to kind of like stifle reading and things
Yeah,
like that. So I think this
absolutely.
being a call to young adults is important. Even though this is a young adult novel, it's actually really an adult novel as well. These
Yeah.
messages and themes in here are very relevant to any reader at any age. And I think it's important to note that.
Yeah, I describe it as a book for all people 12 and up. If you're a person and you're over the age of 12, this book is for you. And Eternity is in a unique position as a 18-year-old protagonist because she's examining questions that are present in both adult literature and young adult literature because of her role and her status on death row. Young adult literature tends to ask the question, where am I, the main character, going in life? And adult literature tends to, generally speaking, ask, how did I get to where I am? And Eternity, because she's on death row, facing down the end of her life, is asking both of those questions. Where am I going? And how did I get to where I am? That quality of Last Chance Live is what I think helps make it an appropriate crossover title for audiences of all ages and helps it read appropriately for adults as well.
So the book is told through the point of view of Eternity. So we learn about her case, we learn about the other inmates on the show competing against her, all from her point of view and her judgments.
Mm.
Being in her head felt deeply relatable, but at the same time, this is someone who's done something really wrong. So, as you were developing her character, how did you find the balance between humanizing her in a way, but also not sanitizing her actions?
I would say the balance between humanizing and not sanitizing came from her inspiration. The humanizing part, Eternity was inspired by a young girl I knew during my time when I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania. I spent some time volunteering in a Head Start classroom, and there was this little 4-year-old girl in the class who was an absolute star. She belonged on TV. And I was really struck by the fact that this child was so vivacious and just so incredible and living and growing up only 2 blocks away from a very well-resourced elite university. But the likelihood that she would ever be able to access the privileges of that university were almost nothing because of her life and the likely trajectory she would go upon. To my knowledge, that child who's now grown has not done anything like what Eternity has done. But that really helped me to see Eternity as human, much like that little girl. Eternity lives just a few blocks from the University of Pennsylvania. Her dream is to go there. It is a wholly unrealistic dream. And the human inside of her. And the part that I imagine every reader and listener could relate to is what it feels like to watch your dream be derailed in slow motion in real time, and to grapple with the dawning reality that what I have longed for and what I've fought for is not going to happen. I'm not even going to get close. And then the not sanitizing part comes from eternity, as I say, being an everyman, being a mirror who reflects all of us. The rage and the anger that eternity harbors inside of her is not unique to eternity. It's something that we all have. And there's actually a few cases in the real world in the news that have sort of underscored this point recently. One is Luigi Mangione, the alleged shooter of the United Healthcare CEO. Seeing Luigi and our response to him was really illuminating for me for a few reasons. One, I'd written a Luigi style character. I started writing this book in like 2018. So 7 years ago, right? Someone who's really physically attractive and voters love him. But two, Luigi was almost a bipartisan unifying folk hero force, right? Who received support from both sides of the political aisle in an era where we don't really have any monoculture anymore. And I think the reason for that was because many people recognized his rage. We understood the source of his anger, which really highlights the extent to which eternity's anger, eternity's rage is something that lives in all of us. We just don't all act on it, or we don't all have the opportunity to act on it, or we don't all have the resources or the will to act on it. And another case is the recent first-degree murder conviction of Donna Adelson, who was convicted of murdering her ex-son-in-law, a Harvard Law School educated professor in Florida. This is a wealthy 75-year-old grandmother in Southern Florida who was doing the same sort of thing Eternity did, right? She's very different from Eternity. She's had a very different life. But again, that rage, that anger, and that desire for the thing we want and how that clouds out everything else is something that I really do think is universal. So when we talk about not sanitizing and humanizing Eternity, a lot of it is just drawing from how we real life human beings are.
Brought up Luigi, and I think not to take away from the actual rage that most of us have, and we were siding, probably shouldn't say we, but we were siding with him for several reasons. One, we're kind of in this realm of we can see and better understand due to social media, which is, I know it's all bad and it made everything good, bad, but it has also brought a little bit more knowledge and access than people had previously. But we're in this realm where we now understand corporate greed. We now understand being exploited as a mass population, and that rage we shared in it because capitalism. Here we have are the fat cats making decisions, and then we look at the everyday person who's suffering and just wants relief and is being denied by just looking at, let's say, a piece of paper, not actually like knowing them or looking at their case. And the actual external of Luigi is, I think, a lot of pretty privilege came into play. And I
Yeah,
think that
absolutely.
we see that a lot with Eternity as well. It's an ongoing thought in her head. No one loves me. I've never gotten chosen. Her focus on her size, which realistically, America is very fat phobic. And if you are a certain way, black, fat, it's seen as a negative. And I think Eternity speaks to that in several ways.
Yeah, I think that the pretty privilege of Luigi, what it did is it allowed us to see our reflection in him. And the thing that motivated him here was capitalism. But what it really is on a deeper level is there's something that we want, right? There's something that is like a paramount value to us. It's the utmost important to us. And we identify someone or something as getting in the way of that. And when something or someone threatens our idols, the things that are the most important to us in the world, that's where and how that rage and that violence and that anger can come out. And that's the case with Eternity, as readers will discover. And that's the case with the wealthy grandmother. What she wanted was, according to prosecutors, she wanted her grandchildren to be able to move closer to her, and her ex-son-in-law was in the way of that. And so her rage and her anger came out, assuming that, the facts of the conviction are taken at face value. And it's that. And I would challenge readers as they think about Last Chance Live as a tool, as they think about themselves as a main character. There's a few ways in which the reader is really the main character of the book. One is this eternity as a mirror, Luigi as a vehicle to see how pretty privilege allows us to identify that rage. And then for readers to really examine, what are the things that I would kill for? And maybe they're righteous things, but maybe they're not, you know? And perhaps we don't kill literally, but what are the things I kill for metaphorically? Whom am I willing to cut down with a significant verbal lashing, right? If they get in my way on this, that, or the other thing. And then the corollary to that is, do I need to be forgiven for those actions, right? That rage, that anger, what happens with that? And that's something else that the book explores too, particularly through the executive producer and eternity.
Yes, good segue, because my next question is about the executive producer. Evan Fletcher believes that he's saving lives and that what he's doing is not wrong because he's a mirror. Can you speak more about his role in the story and the mirroring that is going on?
Evan is the executive producer of the show, whom eternity battles throughout the story. Evan is convinced that he's offering these young people a lifeline, that their alternative was just to sit on death row and have their sentences implemented. And now, because of him, one of those kids is not going to have that fate. He's pretty convinced of his heroism in this, and readers, can decide for themselves whether they think that's true or not. The model of the show that Evan creates is actually one about a pot of money. So the winning contestant wins $20 million. And according to real world university researchers, that $20 million is the estimated cost of a crime. And so the model that Evan creates is one in which the show gives the winning inmate the money needed to pay, quite literally, pay for their crime and earn forgiveness. And he explains in an orientation with media personality and to the contestants why that model is in place. And he explains it with a car crash analogy, that if I crash my car into yours and I cause $10,000 worth of damage, you can say, Helena, I forgive you. But somebody still got to pay for that damage, or you're going to be driving around with a busted car, right? And either you're going to pay or I'm going to pay. And if you say, I forgive you, what you're implying is you plan to pay that $10,000 out of your own bank account, right? And it's the same for really all wrongdoing. It has to be paid for. Asking someone to forgive you or choosing to forgive someone else is really swallowing that bill. It's saying, I will pay the cost of what you've done. And so as Eternity goes through the show and grapples with those questions she's got to figure out at this stage in her life, one of them is, who is going to pay for what I've done? What I have done has created real damage that has to be covered. And I don't see a way out except for America to pick me and let this pot of money cover it for me. So I would challenge readers to think through that application in their own lives. As I was writing it, again, I'm not Eternity and this is not an autobiography, but there's lots of wrongdoing in my life and lots of ways that I hurt people, family and friends and whatnot. And thinking about what forgiveness means, when I ask someone to forgive me, I'm asking them to pay. I'm asking them to pay the price of what I've done. And it's a big ask and something I have to question whether I'm willing to do for other people as well. Am I willing to pay the price?
Wow. I feel like I could be a better person if I actually thought about these things, which makes me
Yeah.
smile. Because now I feel like I don't consider those things on the regular.
Yeah, but that's why this is an invitation. This is not to make anybody feel awful or for it to feel like a downer of a story. The book is not a traditional novel where you have a hero and you're introduced to them and then you sit as a passive audience member watching them battle and emerge victorious. The book is really a framework and it's a case study for us to really contemplate and reflect about ourselves and the real world and our real world country. And my hope is that instead of feeling awful, that young readers and adult readers feel empowered, that they feel capable of taking on the challenge that the book offers to reflect internally and the challenge to act in our communities. I often describe Last Chance Live as a book in which the reader is the main character, because ultimately the real reflection and the brightest reflection of hope and of repair and of change in our real world is in the reader. It's in what the reader does after reading the book, right? I mean, imagine a whole community of people contemplating what forgiveness means, or contemplating their own wrongdoing, or contemplating the ways that America's systems have been distorted and compromised by the wrongdoing that infects our laws and our land and our communities. There's real life things that people can do, and they are the source of that hope and that repair. And my hope is that would be something that doesn't leave people feeling awful, but leaves them feeling empowered. Ultimately, the full story of Last Chance Live begins after the last page. It's in what the reader chooses to do with it.
When readers close the final page of Last Chance Live, what is the single most important question you hope that they walk away with or thinking about? What's the lasting conversation that you hope the book sparks about society, its systems, and the people that's caught within it?
Where is your hope? What are you putting your hope in? Because Eternity puts her hope in a lot of things. She puts her hope in peers. She puts her hope in family. She puts her hope in Disney World. She puts her hope in her dreams, her academic dreams. She puts her hope in a TV show. She puts her hope in American voters. And you'd have to read to, see how that panned out for her and if any of those worked. But I would hope that readers would reflect upon what they're putting their hope in, and then use the questions and the conclusions they come to do something that changes the real world we live in, so that the Eternity at their school, or the Eternity in their neighborhood, or maybe Eternity lives a few miles from you in a different type of neighborhood than the one you live in, that Eternity can have a different life. And I would also hope readers walk away with some understanding that Eternity, and I say us, meaning those of us not on death row, the gulf between us is just not that wide. It feels wide because we have different socioeconomic backgrounds and careers and grades and whatnot, accolades, but there really is not a difference between Eternity and us on the inside. There's a difference in how our trajectories have gone.
That's really inspiring. I feel not awful. Now I feel I like just talking about it makes like, okay, you are a better person. You just have to go out and be a better person. Okay, maybe you don't always think about how you've hurt someone. You can repair it. Maybe that's not always at the forefront of your mind. But if you touch into it, tap into it sometimes and take an action and make a little step, like every day, if you do something to improve someone else's life or to improve something, like not littering, that's
Yeah. 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 That's a huge one.
wanting to dig into more of the characters without giving away too much of the story. Can you talk about the characters and how each of them represent a facet of the system?
So the characters were created to reflect the real world demographics of the system, racially and socioeconomically. One thing that the executive producer, Evan, notes, and this is when you talked about the show being a mirror, this is really what he was referring to. America doesn't think about death row as being populated by young people because of the way our system works. The appeals process is very, very long, and it can take years and years, if not decades, for an inmate to go from their conviction to exhausting all of their appellate options and then having their sentence implemented. So by the time we hear in the news, defendant, or inmate so and so was executed, they're usually in their 50s, 40s or 50s or whatnot. But often they were quite a bit younger when they committed their crime. And the premise of the show and the reason for that age group and that group of contestants is because of emerging neuroscience in the real world that shows that young people, though they might become legal adults at age 18, they really don't become biological adults from a neurological perspective until as late as 25. So the human brain doesn't finish developing in areas that impact judgment and impulse control and all of the things that make a fully formed adult cognitively until well into one's 20s, which raises a question that I invite readers to explore and examine for themselves of whether we should be executing people for crimes they committed under the age of 25 when perhaps they were a legal adult, but they were not a biological adult. So the contestants were written to cover all of those aspects of how the system works currently, demographically, age-wise, and exploring that age question.
I know the way it's packaged with the age range The first time I came across, I was like, why are we
Yeah.
looking at kids? And then as you get further in the story and you learn about the science of brain development, it's just like, oh, this is really important.
Yeah, and it was inspired by in the real world, the American Bar Association's 2018 resolution, which is around when I started writing the book, imploring jurisdictions to reconsider the application of the death penalty to people in this age group, that 18 to 25. The Supreme Court, as of 2005, doesn't allow executions for people younger than 18, but 18 and up, you're good. So the American Bar Association was prompting reflection on whether we should really be doing that. And that was part of where the story came from.
Well, let's back up. We have gotten pieces of the inspiration
Mhm.
behind how you started the story, but what we didn't touch on is the fact that you were a former attorney. How did your work influence your story and the development?
So I did not practice criminal law, and I have no professional experience with people like eternity in a legal capacity. But what it did impact was some of the drafting of the book, making sure that the crimes that the contestants committed were really death eligible crimes. They would be considered capital crimes in the jurisdictions they were in. So reading through the statutes in Texas or Florida and whatnot and figuring out what aggravating factors would I need for this person to really have been given a death sentence. And most of it was just a focus on how this system, with all of its unique legalese language, translates to young people, particularly those without the academic background to process it, how it feels to navigate that. And, you know, for readers, there's portions where eternity is face to face with that, with lawyers and judges and people talking around her about her in what she views to be SAT words. And my hope was that it was somewhat as disorienting for the reader as it was for eternity, because that's what it's really like. You know, it's Kafka-esque in a sense, right? For a young person like her to be in a system, perhaps you deserve to be there, perhaps you don't, but what happens to you is going to be determined in a language you don't get. And so that's another aspect of the book that I wanted to make sure was in there.
And I can tell you that anytime I come across any legal language, my mind just goes off.
Skip,
Um,
right, exactly. Moving
so
on.
I
Yeah.
think you having a background in law, you're able to keep the attention span to even do the research because I got to say, like, we're on social media, just every time they update the terms and service, I try because I want to
Mhm.
know what permissions I'm giving away. But
Mhm.
I would say after the first two paragraphs, I'm just like, okay, I could be selling my soul and
Right,
I
right,
shouldn't
right. I don't
really.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good point to reference that here and also show that, like, the legal system from the point of view of children, essentially, because even though eternity is 18, as you mentioned, there's not much difference in thought and brain development. The way the system is set up is not really helpful for them understanding the decisions that they have to make or have made before they even get to this point. So you touched on this, and it does come down to the readers. But would you say that there are villains in this story?
I would say that there are villains in this story in the same way that there are villains in the real world. And in the real world, we're all villains a little bit, right? Or to some extent. And we're all victims to some extent. And the dynamics of the show, I think, mirror that. Eternity certainly has a very strong viewpoint on who she thinks are villains. And her views are a bit less nuanced than perhaps mine would be. But from Eternity's perspective, really the villain, and this sort of goes back to our earlier conversation, the villains are anyone who stands in the way of her getting what she wants, whether it be a laudable, understandable goal like freedom, or whether it be a less relatable goal. Those are her ops. People who are messing up things for her, you know?
Yeah, her ops. So she is isolated in this beautiful house with other inmates, and they're competing for one chance to live. And some of them will not make it out. Only one person is going to make it out. So, how did you balance the relationship building with her having to look at the people who are the first friends that she's ever had in her life, really, as opponents?
You know, it's funny. I think that the dynamic actually repeats itself a lot in young adult life. Thinking about high school and college age and friend groups and dating. everyone likes the same person, right? Who's going to win, or just some of the infighting that you can have in social cliques and whatnot. That dynamic is not unique to the house. I would say the stakes are unique to the house. One thing that might be a bit more unique to the house among the contestants as they develop their relationship is they're all forced to contend with really existential questions at a young age at the same time, which isn't really the case, right? They all have to decide, what do I think is going to happen to me the moment after my execution if I lose? Am I going anywhere? Am I going, as Eternity describes it, somewhere red, somewhere white, or nowhere at all? And that's a very heavy thing for them to process. And part of their bond, I think, is processing it together and figuring out their own individual answers to, who am I? Am I more, as Brian Stevenson of Just Mercy says, am I more than the worst thing I've ever done? Am I more than the thing that got me on this show? Is there anything redeemable about me? And how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get out of this if I don't win and I'm left with the bill of my crime to pay for it?
So, thinking from the perspective of the reader, what are some of the truths that you want them to walk away with definitively? Like, what should they know about the world through the lens of Eternity and Last Chance Live?
They should know that renewal is real, that everything sad can be made untrue, that the sting of darkness that terrible things creates, it's not that the bad thing gets erased, but the work of repair that comes after makes the renewed version of it even better because it was broken in the first place. And an example I use of that is Martin Luther King. This is a challenging time to talk about this, to be honest, but a challenging time in our country. But generally speaking, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King is an example of this, right? A horrific, horrific darkness, a horrific event. But the power and the sting of the darkness of his assassination, one might say, was really transformed with the election of Barack Obama, or with the rise of, Venus and Serena Williams, or a whole host of heroes and leaders being prominent and taking their rightful space in the American public square, because it showed that the ideals that he spoke of could be implemented, and could be animated in a unique way. And it made the lived experience of those joyful things even brighter because of the darkness that came before it. Barack Obama's election would not have been as impactful in a nation without the assassination of Martin Luther King. It just wouldn't have. And a nation that never grappled with slavery and racism and systemic injustice. And so that is the message of Last Chance Live as well. Everything sad can be transformed. That sadness can become something different. And part of how that happens is through you. It's through the reader, the listener, and what you choose to do with it, and how you experience and act on the agency that you have to do something different.
There's so much, like, it's really inspirational. I don't know of another way to describe it. It's just like, I feel like I have some inner work to do.
Yeah, we all do.
Like,
Me too. We can
we
do
all
it
do,
together.
honestly.
Yeah.
Last Chance Live coming out in this moment, I think it gives more context to what we're going through in general.
This book is really a tool, for people young or older who want to contemplate a new way to navigate the times that we're in, a new way to process the narratives that the world tells them through media or news or whatever else, but isn't sure where to start, or perhaps it all feels a bit overwhelming and like it's just too much. This book is a tool for that, and I offer it really to help with that, how to think, not what to think.
Well, we can use every little bit of help that we can get. So thank you for presenting this novel to our audience, both for young adults and for adults to consume and really think. I think this encourages a lot of critical thinking and understanding more of our system. So
Yes.
for readers who have turned the last page on Last Chance Live and are excited to see what's next, what can they expect?
I can say that it is a standalone novel. It is a different story than Last Chance Live, but it will invite readers to engage in much of the same participation, not just analytically, but also thinking about concrete ways that we can help the real world that we're living in better reflect the values that we espouse. And the particular question that this next book is examining is whether America is in need of a third founding. If the first founding was 1787, animated by this principle, all men are created equal, and the second founding was 1865, the Civil War era, animated by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that came next. If we think that's all breaking down and not working at this point in our nation, what's the new principle? And this is a question that a lot of public intellectuals have put forward. But I wanted to invite readers of all ages, but particularly young readers who are going to have to grapple with this probably in their lifetime. I wanted to invite them to think through that and to figure out what they think this nation should look like.
Wow. First of all, timely. Um, like use the world, use what we're going through as like inspiration because obviously art imitates life. But wow, I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yes, the book is drafted.
Well, fingers crossed that we find out very soon about when that's coming because I'm excited to see it and I'm excited for the release of Last Chance Live and for readers to really dig into the story and spread it with all their friends. So, for anyone looking to keep up to date with you, where should they go?
Instagram. I am on Instagram. You can find me at Helena, Helena dot Haywoode, Haywoode dot Henry. And yeah, I'm also about to head out on tour and support a Last Chance Live. I'll be going to a number of different cities. So please do check out Instagram or the Penguin Teen events page to see if I'm coming somewhere near you. And I would love to see you at one of those events if possible.
Yes, I'm really excited for the tour. I saw some of your dates. You're running through November 22, I think it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very excited. So definitely check out her page to see when she's going to be in town and check out Last Chance Live.